to this panel session on the other Plan A. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes while our attendees just pop on in. Lovely to see lots of names coming in there on our attendee list. Great, it'd be really fantastic if you're joining us to pop your 3 points of interest in the chat box. Would be great. Your name, your area of creative expertise, and where you're joining us from today. That would be really great to give us a sense of where you are. So I'm just going to put that in the chat box as your prompts to remind you. So your name, your creative expertise, excuse my fingers, and where you are. So pop your information in the box, in the chat box there, so we can see who's joining us today. Great. Hi, Sarah. Sarah's in Melbourne, dancer. Fantastic. We're seeing those pop through now. Tina, contemporary dance in Melbourne. Alex in Echuca, great to have you joining us. Jenny in Sydney. Great. Awesome. Panelists, can you see those popping through as well?
Sure can.
Fantastic. Great. Great to have you all here. So before we begin, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I'm honoured to speak to you today from the ancestral lands of the Wurundjeri people. And I'd like to begin our discussion by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land and the various lands on which we gather today. I pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in attendance and extend our collective respect to all First Nations leaders, past, present, and emerging in our creative community. So welcome everybody, it's great to have you here today. I'm Susan Eldridge and I'm going to be musical conductor, guiding the collective creative audience we have. So we're here to have a chat about what it's like to compose a creative life for yourself. And I think it's really important that we start to use the word a creative life rather than a career, because this is something that we have to construct and compose for ourselves. So we've got three fantastic panelists joining us today. Firstly, we have Juliana McGauran. And Julia is a creative director and photographer. She's worked with several commercial clients, including Facebook, Instagram, a couple of companies you've probably never heard of, YouTube, Sony Music. Julia's also completed her Masters in Advertising with the thesis in developing brand personality for emerging musicians. So musicians, I'm expecting lots of questions from you today. And this equips her to work with artists to create exciting images that consciously amplify their personality and their work. Julia, it's great to have you today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. And our second panelist is Keith Brockett, who's a stage and screen performer. His face may be familiar to many of you, and he's worked right across the country. And Keith also he's got his business suit on today. As you can see, he's wearing his other hat because he's a business partner in the faculty's strategy, planning and finance team. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And our third panelist is Hannah Pelka-Caven. Hannah's a musician and an employment lawyer. She's performed at festivals internationally and throughout Australia, including, again, a couple of small things you might never have heard of, the Woodford Folk Festival, Port Fairy, and she currently provides employment advice to workers across the media, entertainment and arts industries for our union, the MEAA. Hannah, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So all of our fantastic attendees, just double checking that you can see that you've got a chat function and a Q&A function. We'd love this conversation to be guided by the questions that you've got burning. So if you've got a question that's specific to a panelist, if you can start your, type the panelist's name in so that we know it's specifically for them. And also to be thinking about when you're asking a question, do you want opinion or do you want action and fact? Just so you can phrase your question in a way that we can answer it that's most useful to you. So we're going to kick off today with a question for Keith. I'm going to throw to you. Keith, how has the pandemic presented new ways to think about our creative lives, and where are you seeing opportunity?
Well, for me, so my background is the performing arts because I'm an actor, performer. For us, the biggest change has just been that we can't be in the same room with our audiences anymore. And for all the performing artists out there, I'm sure you two can agree that it's that communication between audiences that kind of really brings particularly live theatre to life. So for us, it's been challenging. It's been trying to figure out how to recreate that sensation through online media, through things like Zoom. We've I think what's been really helpful is kind of starting to turn towards our film and TV experience, working with cameras and kind of recognizing that where we used to work with a camera being sort of the fly on the wall that we didn't acknowledge. How now do we actually talk to a camera and get through that to another person? So it's kind of, readjusting, realigning your skills and kind of just having fun with it at the moment, because really we need more of that right now. So anything we can do to have fun at this point, I think is important.
Yeah, I think that's probably where all of us are turning our attention right now, is what is making us laugh.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need more joy. We need more joyfulness. Julia, the same question to you. How has this pandemic presented the opportunity to think about our creative practice, and where are the opportunities, or where are you seeing opportunity?
I think it's been really interesting because I think just in terms of how I guess it's changed how I see sort of opportunities is I always sort of thought that creative jobs were sort of in this other sphere of sort of uncertainty, and then you had the other jobs in the world which were all sort of quite linear and on a path, and it was sort of like they were on careers that were on tracks, whereas I think this kind of pandemic has shown that nothing's actually that certain, and nothing out there is sort of a given, or no job is a given for people, and things just change so fast. So I think it's almost made me feel quite like, at peace with the world, because you sort of think, oh, we're all just flailing around, And I think it's, look, in my field, I work with musicians, mainly musicians, and it's an incredibly difficult time. Income's just flying out the window, and, just coming up with new ways to go about things. But I think it is cool because you have to, the world's still running in the same way. So people still want the same product at the end of it. So it's about, like, at the moment, it's from the back end about coming up with new ways to actually think about creating that same product for the moment. So it's about, like, creating a mini set and then photoshopping people in Brisbane into that mini set rather than creating the full set in Brisbane. But things that I think should stay in place for a long, long time, because they're doable and they're easier and they are better for the planet. There's less travel, or so there's lots of exciting new ways to kind of create the same product at the moment, I think.
We all want to see the backstage photos of your mini set photoshopping people into Brisbane. That sounds, I've got like pictures of Lego in my...
it's just me and my PJs, hot glue.
we're all in our PJs. And Hannah, I'd love to hear from you on this opening question as well.
Look, I think I thoroughly agree with what Julia said. I think it's really thrown into relief the fact that actually everything's uncertain. I have so many friends and colleagues who are, phenomenally talented performers and also quite successful in those creative careers, who have had, other lives in retail or hospitality, and or accounting, a whole range of things, who suddenly have had that dried up out of nowhere. I think the opportunities have become available for people who have been able to pivot. So people who have had the funds to be able to buy, the recording equipment or the video equipment, or who have received grants to do that, and who have then been able to upskill quickly to do that. you know, whether or not that's through a Patreon account, whether that's through teaching online. I know that's a huge thing in music in particular, but also things like online gigs. Though I think I'd say that with the caveat that I actually think monetizing electronic gigs is incredibly difficult unless you have a really strong supporter base, because there's so much free content out there available at the moment that it's just difficult. But I also think there are opportunities from a kind of purchasing world as well. Like I know people who are really talented musicians who have always wanted to upskill in a very particular, you know, like Italian ornate Baroque violin, you know, really specific things that are quite hard to get expertise in Australia. And suddenly they've actually been able to get lessons from people in Italy really easily because everyone is in the same boat worldwide.
Yeah. And I think the opportunity that this has presented to us to think about, well, what is possible now? Like geography doesn't matter. Time zones don't matter. I'd love to hear from each of you. One of the reasons that that we wanted you to join us today was you all have more than one creative output, or also more than one career in a way, where you've got your creative practice and you're also harnessing all of your creative expertise to fulfill like another role. And that's something, this plan A, which is your creative career, and plan A, which might be the thing that supports your creative career, is not something, unfortunately, that we are seeing on the front pages of the glossy brochures of schools of creative industries, but it is actually the reality. The graduate data tells us that this is what the reality for all of us is. It's mine and it's yours as well. But for lots of creative practitioners, it's seen as being a less than rather than a taking control of choice of their life. And so maybe if we can go to you, Hannah, if you can tell us about the sort of the way you are creatively nourished and the way you use your skills in a way that has meaning and relevance and financial security attached to it.
Okay, yeah, look, I think in some ways I'm not the best example in terms of that really balanced one way or the other, in that I work full-time as an employment lawyer. Like I work really predominantly using all those creative skills to assist people in the creative industries, but I don't tour as much as I used to. Like I work a full-time job, which has kind of limited some things, but it's also, I'm also still able to gig enough that I'm happy, because that to me was really important. So I play festivals constantly and I can still go overseas to play festivals and gigs. You know, I just have to structure it quite carefully, and I've still got plenty of time. It just means nowadays I write music and license it to other performers a lot in the cabaret scene, for example. I actually genuinely think that in terms of like having a creative background and having studied creative arts is one of the most valuable things you can do. Whether or not you want to pursue that, you know, just that, or whether or not you want to split out with multiple different creative outlets, I actually think it just makes you stand out in a way, but also those skills are going to stand you in good stead no matter what you do. They're going to make you really sellable, if that makes sense. I mean, you know, the ability to actually practice every day at something, to practice your art every day, to show that kind of dedication is something that I think you can bring to every aspect of your life. I also think that the great role, like it's a buzzword and I hate it, but you know, this idea of networking, you know, a lot of the other kind of industries that you can go into, they always want people who can network, which is such a rubbish term, but at the same time, as a creative, you don't know where your next gig's coming from unless you can network, or unless you're willing to talk to people and meet different people and be exposed to a whole bunch of different outlets. So I just think it's a really important way of staying balanced, to be honest.
And I think what you spoke about, that you said at the beginning, I don't think I'm the best example. I think you're the perfect example, because you have decided to take ownership of a model that works for you. And so balance is not, balance is not 50-50. Balance might sometimes be 99% of one thing and 1% of another thing, depending on market forces and stage of life. Opportunity, but you've decided what works for you, and so I think you are a perfect example of how to construct something that's working for you. Keith, could we hear from you?
Yeah, so I have a varied, a checkered past, actually. So I actually did engineering when I was at university, even before I started creative arts. I was a civil engineer, and as I was about to finish my last exam, I, kind of told everyone, like, I'm going to audition and I'm going to do it. And then that kind of snowballed and kind of drew me into the creative arts. So for me, I think the first kind of myth I've always wanted to dispel is this idea that if you're not doing your creative work, you failed as an artist. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you've come out as an actor, but you're not acting, you failed. And I think that's really, it's a very dangerous sort of idea, because that's not true at all. I think sometimes we inadvertently set up an ideal of what the career should be, but we forget then that how our career is actually progressing. And so for me, it started off with, I graduated, and then I realized that, guys got to eat. It's how do I keep my body and my mind healthy so that I can do these auditions and do all that. And so I started to do work casually at the university. This was about 15 years ago. And it was, coming in as and when it was needed. That kind of evolved into part-time work. And now I work full-time with the university. But for me, it was knowing that because I had that finances in place, I could then concentrate on building my skills, whether it's through doing classes or practices, and not worry that I need to kind of keep living from paycheck to paycheck. Because I think that sort of mental burden really gets to people. And I've had friends, and we turn up in auditions, and they're so tired because they've done like 12 hours of hospitality. And hospitality is one of the most grueling jobs you could ever have. But they've been there and they've done that. And I couldn't, how could you possibly have any fuel left in that tank, to then do the creative work you like? So I think it's about dispelling that myth that, you do what you have to do so that you can do what you love. I think for me has been the biggest lesson in this. Yeah.
I can't agree more, Keith, and a point that you just made there about taking responsibility for your personal financial situation. If those of you watching today take only one thing away from this conversation, like I've coached over 1,000 musicians in the last couple of years, and the primary deficit for all of them is an inability or an unwillingness to take responsibility for getting a grip of their finances, because it leads to mental health, it leads to professional distress. You can't, exactly as Keith said, you can't make your work if you're worried about your money. So please let that be a bit of a rallying call to you watching, is that there are, and there's no right and wrong about what that looks like. And we talked with that about Hannah, about building a model that works for you, but taking responsibility for ensuring that your personal financial needs are looked after is going to allow you to have the maximum amount of opportunity for you as a creative practitioner. So if you've got some questions about that, we can get onto that and give you some tips a bit later about how to do that. But Julia, I'd love to hear from you too about this, about the balancing of a couple of different things, and then we're going to go to some questions from our audience.
Cool. In terms of, I never feel like I have any balance ever. But I think when I left VCA, I thought that the only route to be an artist was to exhibit in galleries. Now, I can't measure a wall for shit. Am I allowed to say that? Shizzle? For shizzle. I absolutely cannot stand hanging things on walls. It is like my absolute, it just honestly, it gives me anxiety just thinking about standing there and making it straight. Like it was just, I did not enjoy the process of putting together an exhibition. So I think that was lucky in a way, because I think I sort of, because I'd only considered that the path, I realized that I had to kind of move away from that path a little bit. And I kind of have realized over time too that you can still go back to the gallery, but it's good if you can actually go and live a life outside the gallery, like being working in hospitality, like, being a lawyer, like being an engineer, and then you bring it back to the gallery, because then you're bringing things that are actually real life, that people like, that you've got experience. So it's not a bad thing to stray away. For me, the balance is that I do create sort of work and images full time, and have for about maybe 3 or 4 years now. But I guess the balance for me is that I don't just do it in the one industry. So for me, I work with mainly music, but then also there's the more corporate side of things, which just came from music. So these things kind of come, and it was only when that sort of, I didn't have time to do my retail job, that I quit that, because I felt that the finances, the time versus finances, was that I actually needed the time in the art and I needed to let go the safe sort of financial, because I started to realize that actually the other side was almost becoming safer than the retail side. Because for me, for retail, I was just shocking. I always got asked to stop talking so much and start selling. So, and I realized that my skills that were coming through, I was not skilled in retail either. I was actually really bad at it, whereas I was actually finding myself that I was blossoming in this other area. So why not sort of follow what you're blossoming in? And that might be like dressing dogs, that might be like baking cakes, but I think when you follow what you're actually blossoming in, or that might be organizing things for people, you'll still bring the creative mindset that you have into that. And later, if you want to bring all of that back into an art show, a gallery piece, you can still do that. I think it's sort of, I think the hybrid is about continuing to kind of move wherever you kind of end up moving, I guess.
Yeah.
And also to know what success looks like for you. That's what the sort of underpinning of the comments from the three of you is, to know what is right for you, not to be swayed by the images on the brochures of the, the girl playing the cello. That's the image that you see a bit success about of a music degree. So be questioning of all of the signals that are coming at you about what success looks like, and be able to determine if that is what does success look like for you individually, because we've heard such varying stories. We had a great question from Jess that, Keith, I might throw to you. Jess is saying about networking, and can we just call it people, because really it's just like
absolutely
relationships and people. And yeah, so she said how I'm a young upcoming graduate and I feel a little bit uncomfortable about it. She's particularly asking about social media, but I'm just going to put a blanket over that and say the relationships that are going to matter in your life are not going to necessarily come from social media. So can we go to the actual building relationships with people, because that's what brings meaningful connection and work. Keith, can I throw to you for some
absolutely
tips?
Yeah. Look, see, I'm 42 years old, and it only in the last 5 years did I actually discover I was doing networking wrong. And I think it's because, again, it's words that we kind of misconstrue. I always thought networking was about going out there, talking to all the people. What are you going to do for my business? How are you going to make my career better? Are you of use to me? No, I'm not going to talk to you. Move on to someone else. And that was completely wrong, because especially in the creative arts, networking is about connecting. It's about communication, right? So I don't want to find a director who's going to give me a good job. What I want to know is I want to learn, oh, wow, so you're a musician. Oh, that's kind of cool. These are the skills you do. Hey, I'm an actor. I do these things. That's it. Then you go talk to someone else. And it's only after all these conversations happen that then the work starts, because you'll be going, oh, I've got a project. Oh, I need someone who has a really good ear for music. And you go, oh, I remember that musician I met that time. They seem pretty cool. Let's talk to them. And that's networking now. So when you go out, I think, especially, when you're in foyers, openings, you're meeting new people, it's not really about finding out what they can do for you. It's just about making new friends, and take that pressure off to get to know all 100 people. You just then see, you know, you find the people that you gravitate towards, you find the people that you wouldn't mind hanging out, because when you have to work with them, you're going to have to hang out with them a long time. So it's just finding that sort of familiarity and who's cool and who's nice to be with. And that's later on, that's when those meetings come together and you create work there. So that's, for me, is what networking is now. Yeah.
100% solid gold advice there. It's about giving of yourself, being open, being willing to listen. And I know a lot of artists particularly find people a bit, you know, we're used to being in our own creative cave.
Yeah.
Like for me, it's the practice room. For Julia, it might be in her dark room in the days before we were digital. But we do spend a lot of time by ourselves. And so particularly for, you know, if you're a student or a recent grad and humans are kind of a bit scary, and the thought of picking up the phone or sending someone an email is enough to send you into a downward spiral down the drain. A good way of practicing this is a top tip, I do this with musicians all the time, is don't go through the self-serve at the checkout. And I know we're in, you know, COVID mode. Go through the checkout where there's a person and make an effort to have an interaction with that person. Hi, how's your day, Tom? Oh, are you, you know, and are you close to the end of your shift? Great, thanks very much for my bananas, and off you go. So that's a really great micro growth opportunity that's low risk. I mean, you're out of there, you're only buying bananas. So if you're looking to build your skills in connecting to people, because you're someone who finds that confronting, don't go through the self-service at the checkout at the supermarket. My top tip. Hannah, we've got a really great question that I think is particularly relevant to you, because that you would have some great thoughts on. So Jessica's asking, if you're looking at another career path to supplement your creative career that requires some additional training, how would you combat going potentially into full-time study if you feel it might take you out of the game for your creative work?
Well, yeah, I can definitely speak to that. That was definitely my experience with law, I've got to be honest. I don't think that's something to be afraid of. Your creative career is not going to disappear. And actually, I think it will be enhanced, kind of what we were talking about, what Keith was mentioning before, by the other experiences you have. And I also think that even though it might be terrible to think about, you know, 3 years without gigging a lot or, you know, exhibiting a lot, the reality of it is actually 3 years is, I mean, the time taken to study, it's nothing, I promise you. By the time it's all finished, you won't believe how quickly it went. And the other thing is, I actually think that you can always make time for the things you really care about. I toured while I was studying law. I did a big tour of Tasmania with a terrible magic dance show. It was foul, but it was, you know, life. Anyway, the point being, you can take, you know, you can start a degree, you can take some time off in the middle to do something, you can come back to it. There are so many different ways of facilitating it. I guess one thing I would say is, if you are considering further study, I think you should really carefully think about what that will lead to. And by that, what I mean is, really, I would really recommend things. There's some training out there that leads you to careers that are all consuming, and that's completely fine. But you should think about that before you start it. I started a law degree without ever actually thinking I'd work in the law. I just thought it would make me a more well-rounded person who could win arguments with my sister, who's a lawyer, which was valuable to me. And I also wanted to help people, you know, all that rubbish. But, like, you know, I think there are some careers that really lend themselves to supporting your practice, and there are some things that will eat your life up. So I think I'd just be wary about that. Anyway, hopefully that answers the question. Let me know if not.
Yes, that was fantastic advice. Particularly, you know, if you're trying to, if you wanted to be a pediatric cancer surgeon, there's probably not much room in your life for painting. So, and that answers a question that we also had about at what point did you discover your additional interest, and did you undertake further training? So I think your point there about what does the other side of the training look like as a complement or an enabler to my creative practice was really good, because I know a lot of people think about teaching, but if you're teaching in a school, for instance, say if you're a visual artist or a dance teacher or music, then you're stuck with the semesters, and you've got, it's very difficult to get your touring in around schooling. So like that's necessarily not the greatest fit to enable your creative practice to thrive. Sorry, Hannah, I jumped in there.
No, I was just going to follow up very briefly. One of the most successful musicians I know is an emergency doctor in the UK. He's a soloist with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, but the reason that's such a good career for him is because he can do really short fill-in contracts that are paid quite a lot of money, and then go straight back to touring for 9 months of the year without blinking twice. And I think that's just, so I understand what you mean about the pediatrics, but I mean, he's a very successful musician and spent 5 years or 7 years or however long of his life studying his ass off, but still maintains a very successful creative career.
That's awesome. So yeah, so go and also to look at something that is also going to nourish you. Like you talked about studying law because you wanted to beat your sister in an argument, but I'm sure there was a thought in there about, is this going to keep me challenged and engaged, this thing that's not my creative practice?
I just saw a lot of people being underpaid for a really long time in the arts, and that's what I really wanted to fix. And I'm very lucky that I can kind of do something about that nowadays.
Thank you on behalf of all of us to try and help fix that problem. Julia, we had a really great question for you from Danilo, who's asking, I'd love to know from Julia, how did she find herself working for the music industry, and how did she get started?
This is an interesting thing, and I guess it ties back into the networking thing. It's sort of where people, like for me, my whole, like so far to date, my life and sort of career has just been about following people who I really enjoy spending time with. And that started with my mum and my nonna, and they were my subjects in the music world. They weren't in the music world, but they were the subjects that I was like, you know what, these are the people that inspire me. And then it started to be, I was like, who are these other like incredible women in my life? Because my mum and my nonna, they were the start. So then I was like, oh, my friends, I really, the people around me, I just really, I want to take their portrait. So it was about like, okay, cool. So who are the people around me? And the people around me were my kindergarten friend, who I went for, a tea with every day, who was Alex Leahy, and she started in the music industry. She was in a band who were just playing at the Evelyn at the time. And they were Isabella, my other friend from school, who I met when I played the oboe really badly and she couldn't play the double bass, in the orchestra, and then she moved in my street. So it's literally just, it's by chance. And I've been lucky because the way I work is very, like, I'm super inspired by music. I knew nothing about music before falling into the industry as well. I thought that, like, my dad's friend band, the Noisy Johnnies, wrote Funky Town and Tainted Love because I didn't know what like cover was. Like, I really did not know anything about music. I listened to accordion music and Doris Day on like a CD. It was never my intention, but it's just following who inspired me a lot. And that was, Alex was playing in her band Animo at the time, and they were playing at the Evelyn. And I remember just being like, this is phenomenal. Like, music was it blew my mind. I was like, a gig? Like, this is freaking just incredible. And so it started with just, doing my art and exhibiting things and hanging things on walls, which, was not totally fulfilling me at the time, and I found quite frustrating. And I started to be like, oh, my escape is going to gigs and documenting them and photographing. And then people were like, do you want to do a press shot? I'm like, what's a press shot? They were like, it's like, a photo of the band where, we want to show who we are. And I was like, oh, that sounds like the best thing I can possibly think of. So I started doing that. And then someone else was like, oh, we like that press shot. Do you want to do another press shot? And it's like, oh, I love that, and then like a hospital was like, hey, you can use a camera. Can you do our press shots for our annual review for this year for the community health centre? And it's like, yes, I love press shots. So it started as press shots. And then the more it rolled along, and I find musicians super inspiring because they've got all of the creativeness that visual artists have, but in a different form. So when you can like explode them together, you can actually come up with things that like really merge the two. So that was just, it was literally just following what inspired me and who inspired me and who I just really liked. And I think from that, it ended up being something where it was sort of like I turned around one day, you know, after, and it's looking at my work and it's like, oh, I'm in the music industry now, you know, like, but it doesn't mean that things won't change and you do more back in the health world or more in the art world. I still do a lot of shoots for VCA, which is another point where I never wanted to leave VCA. It was my favorite place on the planet and still is. And so to be able to go back and do just the staff portraits is something that is just so fulfilling and joyful. So it's sort of like just following where you feel good. Then like I feel good doing VCA shots. I feel good in the music industry. They feel like my people. So I'm surrounded by the right people, and that's sort of how it goes, I guess. But your industry, you might be a musician and you might be like, I actually really enjoy working in the space industry, doing sounds for spaceships because I like the people who work in the space industry. You know what I mean? So yeah.
And that's a perfect also in response to Jess's question about networking is find your tribe. Like find people. That's what Julia has spoken about. She found people who she was really intrigued by, and she wanted to find a way to work with them or to give them something. So, you know, maybe if you're just getting started on your career, is how do you build your tribe? Like Keith, when he was doing his engineering degree, his tribe might have been the theatre people. They might not have been the engineering people. And often, particularly in what I've noticed a lot of in Faculty of Fine Arts and Music is we get a little bit siloed. Oh, I'm a film and TV student. I'm a classical music student. I'm a dancer, and we need to get more of this. The world is only going to be better with more collaboration. So, you know, if you're a dance student in the VCA and you want to, you know, dance to the sounds of space, and everybody's looking at you like you're bonkers because it's not, you know, Tchaikovsky. Go find the people who agree that that's a really interesting idea and work with them. So building the tribe of people who care about the same thing and creating ways to work with them and for them. That's exactly what's happened for Julia. I'm sure, Keith, that's what's happened with you in your acting career too. So look for your tribe and build a community.
I think also just quickly, something that's also worth noting, I guess, with the networking thing is networking sounds like you want to go higher. And I think that's one thing, like you see like junior photographers being like, I'm going to work with Beyonce. And it's like, don't go higher, just get better. Like that's what, like just get better at what you're doing. Because if you keep getting better, you can go high, whatever higher means. But higher might just mean creating a better piece of work. And that's what higher should mean. So I think that's just, it really only is about that tribe, I think.
And what is going to challenge us to do our best work and allow us to be joyful as well. Like, you know, I'm a professional orchestral musician, but the music making that gives me most joy is I play with a community band on a Thursday, and they don't tell anybody, but they're pretty sucky actually musically, but it's so much fun. And the people are awesome and they have such a good time, and I can take my children so I can make music with my family, you know, and it's just like, so finding a tribe that allows you to be joyful in your creative practice. And we had a question from someone before about being judged for wanting to maybe take some work that was more stable and saying that was giving up. Is you can define what success looks like for you, and you can be clear about that to a community that might not understand right now because it's a different model than they've seen before. Keith, I wanted to throw to you, as someone who works in strategy planning and finance, which is a long way away from long way away from engineering and a long way away from acting. for people who are going to have a plan A that maybe isn't directly connected to their creative practice, how do you translate your skills and what you bring as a trained actor to work that's not acting?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we're looking at it more in terms of jobs that are not traditionally creative type jobs, right? So if we look outside of this creative arts industry, one thing I've noticed whenever you go through the job application forms and all that, they always come back to the same kind of fundamental skills that they need. And it's going to be things like, can you communicate? You know, are you detail oriented? Can you manage stress and multitask? You know, these are these basic skills that I think every single job requires. And what I've kind of learned is that whatever you do, whatever skills you have, you can always tailor it to respond to the need. You know, so for example, someone's saying, you know, oh, so Keith, this job, you know, it's going to be front counter. You're gonna have to deal with a lot of people every day. Can you manage that? And I go, well, actually, as an actor, I've been trained to communicate, to be interpersonal, you know, to make people feel like they're the only person in the room that I'm talking to. And if I was that boss, that's exactly what I need. I need someone who can do that with my customers, with my clients. So it's about looking at your skill sets, all the training that you've had, and kind of taking out the jargon for a moment and just seeing what that skill does. And then finding those sorts of roles that need that kind of job. So for example, for me in strategy planning and finance, you know, we do a lot of planning. We do budget planning. So I'm talking to coordinators going, how do you want to teach? What do you want to teach next year? How many students are you expecting? That's my interpersonal skills. I've got to make them comfortable so they can speak honestly, you know, that I really want to do this subject. I really want to teach this thing. That's that. It has to be detail oriented, right? Because I'm looking over budgets. I'm looking over money, making sure everything matches up. Sometimes with emails, I'm reading between the lines on what people truly are saying, but don't want to say it out front. I rely on my text analysis skills as an actor, you know, going, okay, I see what you're trying to get at. Let me talk to my bosses, see what we can do. So it's about kind of finding that. It's finding that thing, you know. Yeah, that's probably how I've been able to get into an industry or a career that's kind of very far removed from my creative work. Yeah.
Hannah, I'm going to throw for you in a second, but I know a question that I see a lot from people is, if I'm applying for a job that's outside of what I'm trained to do, just as what Keith's talking about, how do I translate my skills? And often I see people getting stuck because the position description has all the dot points of the things you have to respond to. And they say, oh, I can't do those 3 things at the top, because what's really helpful is if you can unpack the skill behind the dot point, and be able to say, oh, actually, that's really about being able to listen and communicate to people, even though they've presented it in this job application for a job, maybe as an administration position. So they're using a bit of shorthand that their industry knows, but actually the skill to do that, I have done that. I've done that in other areas. That's going to help you be able to, that's the translation part that we can do, is say, oh, I have excellent analytical skills because I'm a trained classical musician and I know how to read a language that's not music and translate that into sound and emotion and connection. So if you're looking to get to work or get work that's not specifically where you're trained, is think a little bit deeply about the skill, but what the dot point that they've put on these jobs, what is the skill behind that? And you probably have that, but it's your job to be able to translate that into a way that they will understand. So Hannah, for someone whose job or whose day gig is in the creative industries but not in performing, how have your skills as a trained musician translated into your work as a lawyer?
Honestly, well, I'm biased, but I think incredibly well. I mean, because for me, when I was originally going for my first law job, for example, there are a lot of questions around, you know, what kind of skills can you bring to this role? And I think when you get down to it, performing, I think it comes back to what Keith was saying around communication and interpersonal skills. And I think there are a multitude of ways of selling that within a job interview. So for example, performance in any kind of capacity, whether as an actor, whether as a musician, or a singer, I think it involves getting up in front of, sometimes large groups of people and just, and getting over any kind of stage fright. And I think definitely in law, where you appear in court or where you talk to the other side in fairly tense negotiation meetings, that requires a fair bit of either confidence or, an ability to fake it until you make it. And I think that was definitely something I was able to get through music and have been able to translate now when I get up in court or whenever I get up, really. But I also think those communication skills, that ability to talk to almost anyone, because I think generally speaking, having a creative background gives you something to hold on to in terms of, most people have played some kind of music, people paint, people do a whole range of creative outputs that aren't necessarily at a professional standard. But if you flag your background, most people have got questions about that, or they've got an anecdote they want to share. So I think that's an easy way to kind of hook onto it. I also think it inherently makes you more memorable in a job interview. So when I went for my first legal job interview, I was a circus agent for like 7 months once. I was a juggler all through uni, just talking about kind of building those weird connections. And then through juggling, and I still juggle, but through all of that, I met a whole bunch of circus performers who I wrote music for. And then somebody was going on overseas for a few months and asked if I could do this agency role. And I think the more of those weird experiences you can bring in to demonstrate your skills in a job interview, you're going to stand out hopefully in a good way.
Everybody loves a great story. Let me tell you about the time I was a circus agent for 9 months. Julia, I'd just love to hear from you a little bit about one thing that we heard Keith and Hannah speaking about was about speaking about yourself. And I know that can be really challenging for lots of artists where we just want the work to speak for us. But as someone who's worked with some global organizations now, how do you go about speaking about yourself with truth and with confidence, but like maintaining a sense of self instead? Do you know what I mean? Like, with truth and confidence, without diminishing what you can offer, and also without getting overwhelmed about what's coming at you from the other side.
I think it's an interesting one. I mean, it's always intimidating. Like I'm never loved. I like being behind a camera, not in front of it. But there's been times, and like doing an artist statement is like the most challenging thing I can possibly do. It takes me like 3 weeks to write 4 words. But I think it's like when you're at that point, and often I think it's the same thing, that you sort of you don't really notice that the clients are at a global scale when there's still people that you just really get along with. So they've hired you because they get along with you and you've gotten along with them and they like your work. So you don't have to, it doesn't feel like you have to prove yourself or explain what you do and I think just when you've made a lot of work, it does kind of say what you do and it does speak for you a little bit. But when you do have to speak for yourself, I think, I guess it's the same with pricing and things like that, which Hannah, I'm sure you would know a lot about. Like, I think I'm going to quickly go to a quick story, but when I moved into a shared studio space, I remember when I was quitting the retail job because it was getting a bit busy, I had these 2 incredible people around me who always have artists around you to help support you, who lift you up, and they were like, quit, you're going to be fine, don't. And every time I'd be like, oh, is this too much? They were like, no, it's too little, go higher. And it was always like, and I'd be sending invoices and, people would come back and being like, that's way too low. And I was like, oh my gosh, underselling yourself is so much more embarrassing, and underquoting is so much more embarrassing. And Gucci doesn't apologize for being expensive. Gucci just goes out there and, is like, this is what I am, take it or leave it, and I think it's sort of got to a point where it's like, it's okay to be like, hey, yes, I know completely what I'm doing right now. I know I can get this done, and I know I can get it done really well. And I know you're going to look really cool in this photo. So let's like get moving and get past all of the fluff and just like create. So I think that's the same thing with, you know, and like with the stuff with Instagram. We were, you know, in the middle of San Francisco, getting interviewed, and you sort of go, yes, we made this because we knew we were doing what we knew how to do, and it worked for you, and this is great, we love you, you know. So it's sort of like, yeah, I guess feeling just working hard and doing what you do and knowing what you do and loving what you do. It sort of doesn't matter what you do, but own it, I reckon.
That's awesome. Hannah, have you got any tips just on this? Because this is a big topic for artists, is about speaking about the monetary value, the exchange of money for our creative output. Have you got any tips for anyone if they're just beginning to be in this space of being offered work or starting to negotiate work?
Yeah, look, I'd recommend talking to people that you know. You know, ask as many different people as you know who do similar work to you what they think you should be charging for it, because I think that's a really helpful position to start with. If you don't, like, if you're coming into it and you have no idea what to charge for something, my recommendation is always contact people and ask around. My other recommendation would probably be put everything in writing. Please, for God's sake, put it in writing. And by writing, it doesn't need to be, you know, a 10-page contract. It doesn't need to be a 10-page letter. It can be an email, but put it in writing before you do it. Put in your terms, you know, put in that you need to be paid within 28 days. Don't just leave it without a payment term. And if you're lost, you know, hate to do the plug, but, you know, contact your union. That's what we're there for, to some extent. So yeah, I think it's really just draw on your contacts, you know, and, you know, draw on your networks, draw on anyone you know, basically. That would be my recommendation. And you'll always learn. I mean, if you muck it up the first time, you know, for the next one, you'll figure out, actually, that took me, you know, 10 hours longer than I originally thought it would. So next time I'm going to charge for that.
When you're 30 hours deep and you're like, oh no, what have I done? Yeah.
We've all been there, I think.
Or you realise that you haven't put your prices up for 3 years as well. That's the other thing, is we sometimes get stuck in particularly in something like teaching, you know, people are stuck at a pricing point they were at 3 or 4 years ago, and they hadn't thought about that. So thinking about, you know, a longer term approach to how I'm going to manage ensuring that my prices are increasing in alignment with the cost of living. Hannah?
Just on that point, also keep really good records, put it in an Excel spreadsheet, because what can often happen, and has happened to me as a musician, I've gone back to the same festival 5 years later and charged the same price or less. Do not do that. It's a terrible look, because they can remember and they can look it up really easily. So if you continue, you know, I think it was a very small festival, so it was kind of all right, but I mean, that's not what you want to be doing. You know, you get better with time, hopefully.
Actually, Susan, if I could chime in as well, I think that's really interesting. Great, Hannah, what you're saying as well, because I think as creative arts, I know when I was going through it at school, we never really talked about the business side of creative arts. And now I've realized how absolutely important that is, just to understand, you know, basic accounting, understanding, you know, basic ideas of contracts and things like that. That really does help, because ultimately we may be artists, but we're also businesses, you know, and we need to be able to be sound, you know, if we're going to keep growing. So I think if people are interested in, like, oh, what else can I learn? Pick up a few little, you know, those sorts of subjects courses to get a familiarity around that. So when people talk about it, you as well understand what they're talking about, and you kind of come to the table prepared.
Yes, because if you're Beyonce, you still need to understand the terms of your contract.
Yeah.
It is not okay to just pretend that it's someone else's job to do that. This is your work to protect and manage. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'd just love to throw to each of you with one last question as we wrap up, and maybe we'll go to you, Keith, is for our creative attendees who are thinking about Plan A and Plan A, if you were to look back at Keith a couple of years ago, and given that we're in a different situation with the pandemic as well, have you got any advice or actions that you would recommend that people could start to think about so that they're well equipped to be able to thrive?
I think uncertainty is the word of the day at the moment.
Oh, Keith, we're losing you there. I think he said I'm hoping he said flexibility. Hannah, could we throw to you, and we'll go back to Keith hopefully when when the internet comes back.
Yeah, no problem. It's a shame, really, because I was going to say flexibility as well. Because honestly, one of my good friends is a comedian. Her name's Alice Fraser. She's excellent. She just did something on Prime, and she was a lawyer, a very successful lawyer. And her first comedy show was called Success is for Losers. And part of the process of that show and part of the learnings from that show was this idea that you know, you might go through your undergrad degree with a very fixed idea of what success looks like. And I think that's probably one of the most harmful things you can get out of it. You know, you might go and your aim might be to join the MSO and be first horn or, you know, the oboe player. But along the way, maybe you're going to discover that actually what you really love is new music, and you go to the Bang on a Can festival in the US, and then suddenly you realize there's a whole tribe of people there who love the same kind of thing that you do. I think the best idea is to be flexible about what you're looking for, because that's going to evolve with time. So I think that's just really, you know, try to just be as flexible as you can about and grasp all the different weird opportunities, even if you don't necessarily know where they're going to lead, because you never know what you're going to get out of them. It might be meeting some wonderfully random people who operate in a completely different sphere to you. That happened to me with circus. I juggled for fun and then got a hell of a lot of work out of it in the long term in terms of playing music for circus performers. And also some of them are some of my closest friends. It's not just a working relationship. So yeah, be flexible about what you want and about the outcomes you're looking for. Sorry if I nicked yours, Keith. It was accidental.
Talk about a dramatic exit. Goodness me.
Keith, can we throw back to you?
Yep, sure. Well, I was going to say that, currently uncertainty is the word of the day, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen. And honestly, we won't know. And I think kind of echoing what Hannah said as well, it's kind of, you know, in your 30, 40 year, you know, creative arts career, you know, making those decisions today kind of, it doesn't really matter so much in the long run, you know? So if you're deciding, do I do A or B? It's like, well, what do you feel like? Because there is really no wrong answer. If you go A, you will go this way. If you go B, you go that way. At the end of the day, it's the impact on you as a whole is not that big. That's what I've learned. So don't sweat, you know, the small stuff.
Awesome, fantastic. And Julia, from you.
Well, so it was what advice you would give, was it? What advice? I think the biggest one is just work really, 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 really hard and don't stop ever. No, take a break, have some balance. But I think when things get quiet and when things get uncertain, work through it, because I think work brings work. And that's probably the biggest thing, is that sometimes you come up with your best things when things are quiet, and then those things can blossom into other things. When I've had a quiet time, I've done, you know, and I don't have any work for a bit, I'll do a shoot with somebody again who's really close to me, who really inspires me and allows me to just do whatever I feel like at the time, or play, or, you know, like just bring together something completely new that I may have felt was too risky to just try, you know, play, you know, and experiment with a client, or if I wasn't sure about it. And then doing that with somebody close to you means that you can get it right. And then when things aren't quiet anymore, you know that you can like extend that idea or develop that concept, or you know, do things like that. So yeah, I think just the best thing is just, I mean, it's really hard work. This creative world is really, really hard, and that's good because it's, you know, it just keeps you going and keeps you inspired, and take a rest when you need to. But I think, yeah, just keep working through it when you're feeling uncertain, because it's better to create than sit in nothingness and quietness.
Yes, make work, do good work. That's fantastic advice. And I think for also, if you're a student or a recent grad, we've talked a lot about this, defining what success looks like for you. So the models of success that you've had presented to you, it's just information. It's not the rule. You know, Julia talked about not being able to measure anything, hating measuring. Is it the people who make the people who make the decisions about what images to show you on the brochures of particular universities are not people who live in the world that you live in and that we all live in. They're not, and they're not facing the same challenges we have, and they don't have the same experience. So it's one version of success that might have been dragged along for 50 years, you know. So just take it as being, it's only one version, and I can define what my version of success looks like for me. So that's a really important thing to take with you, is because we have unprecedented opportunity now to create a career of artistic and financial freedom, because that's what we all aspire to do. I'd love to have a round of applause. Thank you very much for Hannah, Julia and Keith for joining us today. You can find, I'm sure if you Google them, you can find them all if you wanted to ask them some questions. And also thank you so much to Dove Renga-Thorpe from the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music, who's put this series together. She's awesome. She has so much love for artists. We're very, very lucky to have her being a constant source of inspiration for our community. So thank you very much. Glad you took lots of notes. Go cause a ruckus, make some art, and maybe get out in the sunshine today if you can. So thanks everybody, and take care.
Thanks very much.